Chapter 3. Nicholas had come to think of the letter he'd received so many months ago as the golden letter, for somehow the generous heart that had penned the words had met and mingled with his own wish for a child, and a strange spiritual alchemy had occurred. The elders of the universe, seeing the wish of one and the love of the other, had wrought an uncommon wonder, and Nicholas and Viviana were presented at last with their own child. Now summer was quickening into fall. On a cloudless day when the leaves were just beginning to flame into gold, a vast crowd gathered silently on the terrace of swans before the crystal castle of Forever. Mermaids, naiads, and even quarrelsome water sprites shared the cool waters of the reflecting pool. A pink cloud of fairies hovered above the heads of the poets, artists, princes, heroes, magicians, gnomes, goblins, centaurs, and fauns who waited patiently for a sign from the castle. Behind them, the gardens of the palace unfurled their splendor, and beyond that, the Viridian River curled like a blue-green snake through the fields where herbs and fruits grew. This plain, which had no name, stretched on as far as the eye could see and glowed with a pulsing light. Sometimes the sky above was a dreamy, soft silvery. Sometimes the air was bathed in the colors of sunset. Far beneath the plain were the caves of the ancient wizards, whose spells and potions caused the magical light. Suddenly there was a stir in the crowd. A wave of excited whispers rippled through the assembly as Nicholas stepped out upon the palace steps. "He's here! But look at his face! Look at his eyes! They're glowing! I told you! Everything must be all right." Everything was more than all right. Beaming, Nicholas bowed to the fairies. He bowed to the dragons, who were still looking sleepy from their summer nap. There was Melisande, he waved, and Beatrice, he waved again. There were poets, bunched around a tree, arguing about anapests. There were the goblins, fussing and fretting next to the pool, probably driving the water sprites mad. Gawain, always useful, was urging the centaurs to step back and allow the gnomes to see. Nicholas looked up. The phoenix nodded with slow dignity from his perch on the old oak. The rock offered his usual terrifying smile. Nicholas felt as though his heart would burst with joy. He opened up his arms wide and called, "My people, today is a great day in our land, for a child has been born to us, the first child ever to be born in the land of the immortals. You have a princess, my friends, and Viviana and I have a daughter." An enormous shout went up from the multitudes, punctuated by excited cries of "I told you so!" just as we thought, and I could tell the minute I saw his face. "What's her name, your highness?" called out one of the naiads in a voice like a bell. Nicholas grinned. "We have named her after the bright Flora of Christmas. She is to be called Holly. And I assure you, the universe has never beheld such perfection." Even the goblins had to smile at their king's delight. The Bouquet sisters were so excited that they flew about in a frenzy, bumping into one another and into the rock, who looked at them disdainfully. The mermaids thwacked their tails enthusiastically in the water, and several poets, momentarily distracted from anapests, decided to compose odes to the new Princess of Forever, and then held a contest to see which was the best. The unicorns and the melicorns gambled upon the great lawn. Throwing his head back, Nicholas laughed heartily. Never had the universe contained such an abundance of delight. Can the sound of laughter waft along with a breeze, curl and twist on clouds, travel through frozen gray fog, tumble through empty caverns, slip down slippery rock precipices, ooze into sucking mud, and seep up through the cracks of an iron fortress? Perhaps. Perhaps laughter is so powerful that it penetrates rock and metal. Or perhaps the thin silvery ears that heard the sounds of joy in the land of the immortals were especially keen. Haricon twitched and sat up. A mouse, whose frantic attempts at escape had been amusing the warlock the evening before, was attached by a thin silver collar to Haricon's iron bedstead. Now he snapped the collar open, and the little beast dropped into his waiting palm. It lay there, stiff with terror, its heaving sides the only sign that it was alive. Haricon stroked the quivering rodent with a long, dirty fingernail. "A child has been born, and forever," he remarked conversationally to the mouse. "And Nicholas is a proud papa. How darling! Not only a beloved king, but a happy family man. Nicholas was always lucky." Cautiously, the mouse opened one eye. Except for an unnatural whistling in his S's, Haricon's voice sounded quite normal. "Awake, are we?" cooed Haricon, stroking rapidly. "Wee little mousie would be happy in the immortal palace, wouldn't he? Little mousies love cozy, warm rooms with deep velvet sofas and soft woolen rugs, don't they? And Nicholas, the family man, with his lovely Viviana and his baby princess, would drop nice toasty crumbs for you, wouldn't he? Then little Mousie and all the other fools would sing jolly songs to their beloved king, wouldn't they? Oh yes, little Mousie, you would be happy and forever, wouldn't you?" Haricon fell silent, but his finger did not cease its stroking. Suddenly, he hurled the mouse against the opposite wall with all his strength. The squeal, the soft thud, seemed to satisfy him. He leaned over the edge of the bed to watch the roaches descend upon the body. Though Haricon's eyes rested on the pile of insects, his thoughts were elsewhere. "A baby princess," he mused. "How very festive, I'm sure. That's the trouble with our most sovereign state," he added, raising his voice a bit. "Not enough festivities. Don't you agree, Beischelag?" "Yes, my lord." A thick, yellowing white head came into the room. It was enormous, nearly as large as an 8-year-old child. Its eyes were gaping pink holes, and its mouth was a lipless crumble. 2 rubbery arms hung from the yogurty folds of his sagging neck, and though these limbs appeared useless, Beischelag used them to propel himself forward, as he had no others. "Not enough festivities," he repeated with a grin. Haricon grinned back, his silvery skin pulling against his cheekbones. "Kindly Santa wouldn't begrudge me a little fun, would he? Jolly old Saint Nick brings joy to all, isn't that right? And would hardly turn away his old chum Haricon from the christening. After all, I'm an immortal too," he giggled. "Immortal too, my lord." Haricon picked up a mirror and gazed at his reflection. "I've aged terribly in the last century. I must spruce up a bit for the party, my dear." Hardly were the words out of his mouth when the seams of his silver skin tightened into smoothness, and his narrow, glinting eyes appeared to widen and lighten. His robe, spattered with strange yellow stains, ballooned into the air and resettled itself into a graceful purple velvet tunic. The iron band that had encircled his head so tightly ever since the first terrible day he had come to Odal could not be removed, but Haricon did have enough power to enrich it with jewels and filigree until it almost looked like a crown. "Much better," he purred to himself. "Much better, my lord," repeated Beischelag. As long as you didn't catch a glimpse inside his mouth, Haricon looked similar to a human. The mouth betrayed him. No warlock could alter the color of his mouth. They could always be identified by their telltale tongues. The best warlocks, the ones who meant no evil and who used their enchantments for the benefit of others, had mouths colored a pleasant shade of aqua. The variable warlocks betrayed their weakness with mossy green gums and throats. Warlocks who stirred up trouble had mouths the color of pine trees. Haricon's mouth was black. His tongue was mottled gray and black, and his gums were the color of tar. His teeth, long and yellow, were sharply pointed. It had not always been this way. Thousands of years before, Haricon had walked out of the stars, a fair young man, and stepped down into the mortal world to play the game of its mortals. The elders of the universe, who had set him in the sky at the beginning of time, had so admired his strength, his courage, and his ability that they did not send him back to his celestial home. As a result of their indulgence, Haricon grew infatuated with life among the mortals. In return, all the world grew infatuated with Haricon. As he stepped through the forests, animals and birds followed behind, as if drawn by a magnet. In the towns, mortals bowed before his wisdom and heroic skill. As time passed, Haricon swelled with the importance of his own power. He became a king, ruler over a vast and populous domain. He grew greedy and commanded his people to wage war upon their neighbors. Hordes of Haricon's shoulders laid waste to the nearby regions, and slaughter and famine followed his victories. Upon their leaders' orders, the victors enslaved their former enemies, and Haricon's territories became infamous for the cruelty of the powerful and for the poverty and despair of the weak. Haricon grew fat and indolent. His desires were constantly satisfied, and his pleasure was law. Larger than his bloated body was his monstrous pride. As the years wore on, he grew discontent with the monuments and palaces that had been erected in his honor. None of them, he felt, did justice to his grandeur, his might. Lying on a golden couch, his massive belly supported by two great golden pillows, he reflected sourly on the structures devoted to his admiration. The problem, he realized, was that admiration itself was insufficient. An idea grew in his inflamed heart. Admiration must give way to worship. The mortals must be taught that he was a god. After all, he reasoned, he was immortal and nearly a god already. As the mortals were easily persuaded, he merely needed to inspire them with awe and terror, hardly a demeaning task. He yawned. Accordingly, in the following months and years, Haricon summoned up from the pits and bogs of the subterranean world all the sorcerers, witches, and alchemists he could beguile to his cause. They taught him their secret arts, their powers of conjuring, until, in the end, he could transform himself into any creature, lay spells of any sort, and create any object he desired. Far from being a god, Haricon was now a warlock of monstrous proficiency, and his former teachers cowered before him. As he laughingly practiced his new skills, an alchemist was miniaturized and put inside his flagon to boil, a witch's hands were petrified and fell off. Haricon was unaware of the elders who watched him from afar. Finally, the time for his first performance approached. Haricon issued a proclamation, calling all citizens of the many cities within his empire to gather before their temples at a certain day and certain hour. At precisely the moment designated, a figure clothed in flashing silver emerged from each temple roof and hovered in the air over the screaming populace. It was Haricon, multiplied into many figures. He gestured for silence and began his announcement. "You will be pleased, my people, to hear of my elevation to divinity. The elders of the universe visited me in the night and begged me to take upon my shoulders the yoke of omnipotence. After much persuasion, I agreed. In my beneficence, I have come to tell you of my transformation before I undertake my sacred tasks, allowing you, my people, to worship me before all others and earn precedence in heaven." Haricon stepped back, dropping his eyes earthward in a pretense of modesty. To his astonishment, his subjects did not instantly comply. Rebellious murmurs reached Haricon's ears. "Blasphemer! Deceiver! Godless jackal!" Fury rose in Haricon's throat. "You dare to hesitate!" he howled. "You will feel the wrath of God!" He pointed his finger toward the ground, and a slender rod of metal hurtled toward his populace. When it touched the ground, the staff exploded like a bomb, and thousands of slivers flew into the eyes of the people, blinding them. Suddenly, from the clouds scudding across the sky above Haricon's head, came a tremendous roar, and he was flung from his perch. He fell, screaming, into a cavernous tear that appeared in the land. Down and down he plummeted, and as he fell, the voices of the elders revealed his punishment to him. You, Haricon, once our favored princeling, have become a deadly disease in the universe, a spreading decay of cruelty and disbelief. You have time and again chosen evil over good, and you have dared to use the gifts we bequeath to you to feed your hunger for power. Far from a god, you are now a force of destruction. In the normal course of events, we would simply annihilate you. However, some in our membership have pleaded for a different arrangement, reflecting both the enormity of your offense against the universal harmony and our own responsibility for your vile deeds. Thus, we give you notice, Haricon, that you are now our prisoner, shackled for eternity by the curse of the elders. You are condemned to Odo, the fortress that sweats beneath the earth in its bed of molten fire. The air of that realm will be as necessary to you as oxygen once was to your mortal body. In Odo, you will remain crippled by your own wickedness, because no being in our universe may be deprived of the freedom to choose the good. We cannot forbid you to practice your wizardry in Odo. Know that you will have few subjects in that infernal realm, for though you are permitted to travel to the mortal world and beyond, you will not long survive outside Odo, and each exercise of your enchantments will further weaken you. To protect the innocent of the universe, we also decree that when you leave the fortress, bitter storms will accompany you to signal your arrival to your victims. Moreover, you will be powerless except in the presence of fear. But where love overwhelms fear, you will have no dominion. Haricon fell heavily onto the ground, his bloated body slapping against the warm layer of scum that coated the ground. Groaning, he rolled over, conscious of a driving pain in his head. Your new status, continued the echoing voice around him, will be shown by an iron band around your brow. We are lodging it in your skull now, there, and it will never come away as long as the curse remains unbroken. Haricon lay still. For days and days he lay on the ground where he had dropped. Every once in a while a soft yellowing arm poured water down his throat. Slowly his bones began to reappear under his graying flesh. Later, as he wasted, his joints jutted up, almost cracking the skin. Then one day Haricon's eyes clicked open. His eyes saw a long, pale expanse of featureless metal. He blinked. As long as the curse remains unbroken, he was answered with silence. I know you can hear me, Haricon called, raising himself a bit. Tell me how the curse can be broken. The lights went out in Odo, and a long sigh reverberated through the halls. To free yourself from the curse, you must possess the purest and most compassionate heart ever born. This heart must be free from stain and must be freely given to you in the fullness of love. If you can attain this, you will once more be free. These are the laws of the universe, and they cannot be altered. Haricon rolled over and looked up at the glowing orange sky of his new home. He smiled up in the direction of the world. You shall see me again, he hissed. Chapter